Hi, everybody. How are you doing? I'm excited to be here today in this remote format, the semi-live presentation. So I'm here to talk about facilitation for organizational change, which is usually a full day session. But I'm going to do the best I can to get to some key concepts in 30 minutes. We got a little bit of time for Q&A afterwards. So looking forward to that and seeing you all in a little bit. So my name is Dallase. I'm the founder and principal of Trust. I work with institutions that are dedicated to climate justice work, and I do this through training and coaching and workshops such as this, to strategic planning, media facilitation, and collaborative framework in working with larger collectives. So I'm excited to have my first GCSHE as working with Trust, which I started in June. Some workshop goals for today. So I want to be able to do an overview of the psychology of group dynamics and specifically the role of a facilitator in thinking how we can take some of these tools that I've showcased in the past about in-person meetings and show how it can actually tie in nicely to remote meetings as well. So how are we going to get there? There's the psychology of group dynamics and decision-making. We're going to talk about the role of a facilitator, meeting mechanics, and then importance of feedback and what you do after meetings. Thinking about human behavior, we often have this ability to reflect inward, but unable to see the intent behind other people's behavior. And I like this quote here saying we tend to judge others by their behaviors and ourselves by our intentions. And so I think part of this workshop is to kind of stop and reflect on what we think some intentions are, or recognizing we don't know the intentions of those who join our meetings. So how do we get curious? How do we pop thought bubbles? And how do we create a platform where people can honestly engage with each other to create strategies for organizational change? I like to start when I think about the psychology of behavior and the psychology of group dynamics with the individual. And that I think it's easy for us to look at ourselves and think about behaviors that we have that and that we've been meaning to change but haven't, and that even in our own even with ourselves it gets confusing. And we find ourselves thinking, huh? What's going on here? Now, if you add a whole bunch of other people to the mix, it's in the same boat. Like you're in this situation where you have lots of other people's thought bubbles that you don't know. And they're trying to handle their own thoughts and their own ideas and their own behaviors in a larger group dynamic. And that is why we often get stuck in meetings. And that is why we often get stuck with organizational change, because it is a lot of moving pieces, a lot going on there. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to jump in and talk about the psychology of group dynamics and give some vocabulary that I think is going to help all of us communicate and help us think about how we interact in groups and what might be going on. One of the first vocab that I want to share is social arousal. This is the idea that, again, when we're by ourselves, we might think about our behaviors in a different way. And whether we're aware of it or not, what happens is when other people are present, because we are social beings, we care what other people think, our brains start acting up and thinking, is this a fight or flight scenario? Like our amygdala is checking in to see like how we're doing, like what's our social status in this group with all these stakeholders. So that happens, but also our heart rate kicks up. And what that does is it strengthens our dominant response. Now, so if you're doing an easy task, like maybe arithmetic that you've been practicing for years, you might actually be able to perform better knowing that there's people watching and there's a stop clock. But if it is, multiplication tables, if you haven't practiced since who knows when, there's a very good chance that things that you could do in your own time and with no one watching all of a sudden becomes very challenging. Same as true if you think about with athletics. You know, those athletes that practice, they perform better with people there because they have gone through the practicing routine has allowed the frontal lobe to take hold during those moments. However, if you haven't practiced, again, the amygdala can kick in and it can make you have those moments where you don't perform the way you want to. Because I find it can be a helpful way to think about those people in your meetings and what they might be going through, including yourself. So the first vocab is attribution error. And this is when we fundamentally put a behavior solely on the person's actions and what we can see, and not necessarily thinking about how you interacting with that person or the environment of itself might have something to do with behaviors that they're showing. So in this situation, we have this woman who is repeating herself over and over again. And this person over here is like, oh, this person loves to hear herself talk. That's why she's repeating herself. That's the type of person she is. Again, attributing this to her personality and not to the environment that she might be in right now. But what's really happening is she's feeling like she's not being heard. So this whole thing of like, I'll just ignore her, or if you're in a meeting and you're trying not to encourage a behavior, sometimes we choose to ignore it, and that actually might exacerbate the behavior in which you're trying to reduce in a meeting. Evaluation apprehension is when someone in the meeting, you're in a situation where they keep repeating themselves and you are thinking to yourself, oh, we're totally off track, and I know we need to get a lot accomplished, but I don't want to be seen as pushy or bossy. And redirect this meeting. And so you're looking around and you're feeling overwhelmed by this, but that fear of being evaluated and seen as something negative to how you'd like to see yourself will stop you. The other thing is you'll look around to your left and to your right and be like, no one else seems to mind, right? Because you can't see their thought bubbles either. So what happens is you don't say anything, other people aren't saying anything, and you just have like a really bad meeting where you're not accomplishing what you're hoping to accomplish. And over time, this creates learned helplessness. So learned helplessness is that when you feel like you don't have control, you just learn to check out a little bit. And in this situation, like these people here are saying meetings are a waste of time. I gave up caring years ago. And I'm sure there are people in your meeting, maybe you are that person in the meeting that feels this way. And so you check your email or you daydream about happy hour, who knows, but you're not engaging in the meeting itself. And then the last concept I want to share with you is called cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance, I think, is this magical thing to consider in your life. So your little Jiminy Cricket on your shoulder, because what it does, it helps you align what you see about yourself and your value set versus the behaviors you actually show, right? And when they're not in alignment, you get this physiological reaction that is incredibly uncomfortable. Like for me, it's like sweaty armpits, a little bit of a stomach ache. I do not like it when how I see myself doesn't line up with my actual behavior. So in this situation here, what this woman is saying, I am an organized, reliable team member. But then the person running the meeting is like, Yellow, can you give us some updates on your task? And you say, oh, I didn't do them, right? And so I'm super reliable, but I'm not reliable in this situation, and I'm starting to feel cognitive dissonance. So you try to rationalize. And sometimes we rationalize to reduce that feeling of that physiological arousal and say like, well, I do it more than the other person, or I had other tasks, but the reality is it didn't match up. You weren't being reliable in the situation. But what happens often is a meeting facilitator or person running is like, that's okay. Which if it is, that's one thing, but often it's not. And that's why we're not moving and progressing in between meetings. And so that person's feeling frustrated because they're saying one thing, thinking something else, and we're not holding each other accountable. And we're not building trust in those situations either, right? Because I can't count on what you're saying to actually be what you're feeling and vice versa. So I think being able to hold people accountable, not shaming, but just saying, we really need to get this done is something to that can help in meetings, and it's a good starting point with you as the individual yourself. So what is the role of a facilitator? What is something that you need to think about in your role as trying to move your organization forward one meeting at a time? To be a successful facilitator, you need to be willing to change your behaviors first. It is not about controlling others. And I'll talk about how this is, because like at the end of the day, being able to see people beyond just their behaviors and get curious about their intent involves a lot of emotional labor. And we often undervalue what that means in our jobs as change agents, is the emotional labor of our work. So as a facilitator, it's all about you. You create the space for constructive discussions. You set and manage expectations. You are transparent with your process. You are clear about your role and responsibility. You model consistent, reliable behaviors, and you are not alone. So you can ask, you can engage people in a way that you can get a lot more out of your meetings than you trying to sort of speak to everybody and sort of like just a presentation mode and hoping things change by that. So the other thing to think about is like a helpful tool in thinking about your role is you're a referee, not an announcer. You're not just going to a meeting and being like, all right, meeting started, and just talk to people about what they're saying and then letting people kind of like passing the conversation on to others and having no rules, regulations, boundaries in it. It makes it really hard for people to play their best, role in a meeting if no one's calling foul, if no one's calling in bounds or out of bounds, right? So as a facilitator, you're creating that space for people to do their best work. So you're managing the pace of the meeting, like keeping an eye on that shot clock, right? You're managing a process and personalities and emotions. You're setting those in and out roles. You're making sure everyone is heard. You're finding ways to support and bring up some of the people who have under talking behaviors, and you're managing respectfully and gracefully some of the people who are over talkers and storytellers, and you strive to be fair so everyone can bring their best selves forward. So that is your role. And it is okay to create that space, because if you don't do it, everyone's wondering who is. And all that stress that you might feel of needing to set the boundaries is passed on to everyone else, so they can't really focus on the task at hand. So that's sort of why meetings are challenging, right? All the different thought bubbles of what people are experiencing, what your role of facilitator is. But the next question is like, what are the tools? Okay, I get it. Like I need to create some boundaries. I need to think about managing all these different behaviors in meetings, but like, what's my role in this? And so this is where I like to talk about the meeting mechanics. So creating that process and structure to give that space for dialogue, to give that space for divergent and different ideas is really important to have that full engagement. So a few things going to cover is modes of engagement, meeting preparation, facilitation tools, and then especially when the online world and meeting follow-up. So not all meetings are equal, right? There's going to be meetings where you give information. So if you think about this situation, I am giving you information. It's very efficient. And that it's good to know, like, this is the type of meeting I'm having. There are meetings when you're asking for information. You're saying, like, I need to make a decision and I would love your insights. But at the end of the day, I'm making the final decision. And then there's meetings where you legitimately need everyone to weigh in. Because, this might be even like ordering lunch because there might be food allergies. There might be people who got food poisoning from a certain place. And so you're collectively saying, yeah, let's all go to this one place together. Because if you choose a place where someone can't eat and it's just not going to work, that would be not helpful for the entire group. Often what happens is people think this is happening. They think everyone is collectively coming up, but what's really happening is you're making the final decision, and that can be disheartening for people, and that can also develop learned helplessness. So be very aware whether you're actually going to take everyone's decision, you have a clear decision-making process of how you're going to go forward, or at the end of the day, it's just you. And I think people are okay with it, but they need to know which one it is. And then the other piece, which I give a big preview to, is that sometimes the final decision maker is not in the room at all. And it's important to kind of think through the value set of that individual or set of individuals. So you're not creating this like slam dunk feeling good moment with the group, but realizing at the end it's actually not going to pass the test. And this happens a lot. Think of like long strategic planning processes where senior leaders were never really engaged and it doesn't go anywhere because you weren't thinking about their expectations of the end product. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about meeting prep. Do your work. So if you were setting up a 2-hour meeting, hypothetical 2-hour meeting, often meetings are 90 minutes, I find, but I put a 2-hour here. How much time do you spend in preparing for that? Now, I've done a lot of previous workshops. As I said, we usually send out a survey in advance, and what we find is majority of people spend like 15 to 60 minutes on a 2-hour meeting. I'm going to share with you that you need to be on that like bottom end. You need to be in that 90 to more than 180-minute meetings, like minutes to prepare for a 2-hour meeting. And that is because the more you prepare, the more you're going to get out of that meeting. And it might feel like a lot of time, but what you realize is you actually accomplish something. And so instead of having, the 14 people in your meeting sit there for 90 minutes and not get anything accomplished, that's a lot of hours versus you spending those 2 hours to really get it right, so you can progress and have a productive meeting. So a few things I like to share is you always need to have meeting goals. And so I think there are still lots of meetings I join where I'm like, I actually don't know why we're here. So be clear. Have your meeting goals, state them at the start of your meetings, keep them visible in these Google. If you're in person, chart them up, write them on a whiteboard so everyone's clear and can see it. If you're remote, have a Google Doc or a shared document where everyone can see and scroll back up and see it there. Because they're going to be your compass if you get off track. They're going to be something you point to if someone goes down a rabbit hole. You're like, I just want to make sure we accomplish our meeting goals today. And you can get there. Think about how you want to set your goals by saying, by the end of this meeting, what will we accomplish? Always map out your agenda. So how are you going to actually meet those goals? Sometimes I see goals and I see an agenda and I just it doesn't seem to connect. Like, how is this agenda going to support these goals? So make sure they're connecting. What is the process for engaging my group? Like, how do I know that I'm going to support the people that have behaviors of under talking or storytelling or learned helplessness to those who, are more withdrawn and might not want to engage in certain ways. So these are really helpful for you to think about. How am I going to engage everybody and how much time will this take? Not putting together an over-ambitious agenda that you never actually get to at the end of the day anyways. When I have my goals and I'm thinking through my agenda, here's 5 things I think about. What is the task? Here's I want to be able to think what I can say to those in my meetings. Here's what we're going to do. This is the outcome. This is what we'll have when we're done. Here's the process. We're going to do A and then B and then C. What's the rationale? I want to go in this order because I think it's going to support the group process and I want to hear from everyone today. What's the expected time? I say this might take 5 to 10 minutes. I do not share my agenda time frame to everybody else in the meetings. I just usually do a high-level overview with no times attached because I find that if I send you my time, the second the meeting starts, a part of your precious brain that I want to have engaged in the content is just wondering if I am a minute behind or a minute over or like off track or not. And I know I do it. If someone gives me a time meeting, I know we're off, like that is all my brain is thinking about. So I don't want you to have to worry about that. That's my responsibility. I have an internal agenda, which I'm sharing here, that breaks it down sometimes by the 2-minute intervals. And that's helpful for me. But if I'm off track, I know I adjust. I might say, 5 minutes instead of 8 minutes. And you don't have to worry about that. That's I consider being a good host, a good meeting facilitator. Okay, but I do think about it. I think about the exercise, I think about the resources I'm going to need. I think about what I should send out in advance of the meeting because you can get a lot of ideas out before a meeting and make the best use of that in person or in Zoom meeting time. I anticipate my logistics. Do I have dual screens? Can I see what's going on here and participate with you here? I test out my tech. Is my audio working? Internet connection, all of those things, right? And I like to remind people in advance that I want to see them and find ways to get them to engage in meetings. I always ask people to do theatrical head nods or like thumbs up because it's really hard to engage in a remote setting. And then in the start of my meetings, I like to ask people to, if I had homework, I like to give space for people to review it in the meeting. And as much as I wish they had done it before my meeting, sometimes they haven't. And that's sort of part of it. So life is crazy right now for a lot of people. So instead of kind of giving everyone like 15 minutes or 20 minutes, especially for the person who already did the reading, I try to do an activity, have people like pair up and talk about what they learned. But the end of the day, I know that I want everyone to have the same collective starting point. And I like to make sure I've given space because that's the context of the meeting, and it's really hard to make decisions and make progress if people don't have an anchor and know what you're talking about. Other things to think about is have core values. Set it up at the beginning. Let people know that in your meetings, you are going to have a core value of full participation, or you're going to value the collective wisdom of the group, or that you have a shared responsibility of the outcome, right? All of those things are incredibly helpful to establish at the front of your meeting. I literally will have a poster in my room that I carry with me to every single meeting to say, here's our core values, because I can always lean back and say, I want to make sure we get full participation. So that helps me encourage some people who aren't talking to speak up, and encourage some people who might be taking it more than their share of the meeting to pass the talking stick onto somebody else. Also, visual management. It's not only being able to see people and manage and get a temperature check of emotions, but having a shared screen is so helpful. I might ask people to take notes. I have them engage with it. They can see my notes being taken and be like, that's not what I said, Dallase. Like, please rewrite that. And I'll encourage them. I also will highlight parts on the screen if someone's repeating themselves, like, did I capture it here? Do you see this one section I've highlighted? And they'll say yes. I was like, did I capture it? They'll say yes. I was like, great, moving on, right? It's a good way to control the pacing of a meeting. Other things you can think about is taking note of who's spoken or not. You can do it just making sure you're hearing from everyone. Have people interact with it, and use those breakout rooms with Zooms like that Zoom has available. It is so important. It is so helpful to have people have smaller discussions, because you just can't have that dialogue in a 20, 10, even 7-person Zoom meeting. There's just too much of the slightly awkward delays or muted moments for it to work. So there's different type of meetings processes. So there's the divergent, and then there's going into convergent. And divergent means you're thinking of lots of different ideas to problem solve, and convergent means you're coming to the conclusion of what you're doing. And I think when we think about doing these things, we like have this grand time with divergent, and we know at the end there needs to be one decision, but we do not know how to get there. And what happens is you get into the groan zone, this middle part here, and that is real. The first rule of the groan zone is you need to acknowledge it. You have to give it a big fat hug, because it's going to be there whether you want it there or not. And so if you warn your group that if you're doing it right, it's going to feel really hard to converge and to come up with a process that is not artificial harmony, where you're like, sure, whatever. Like, you don't want to be there. You want, like, I believe in this core value that we have a shared responsibility. That's going to take the groan zone. And so you want to think through tools and processes to help converge these ideas. So when it comes to divergent, going back, divergent, how to get those ideas there? One of the things I like to suggest is to give people individual space to think of things on their own, so they own it and they're thinking about what they want to contribute. Then I encourage small groups. Not only do you get to hear from everybody and people have a chance to talk, but you get more ideas. You can have 4 groups. If your people report out and get 12 ideas, but if you have these single file line meetings, you can only hear one person after the other. And if someone, I don't know, shares a story that takes half the meeting, then you don't get to hear from even that many people. So how do you think about gathering information from everybody, having a voice from everybody, and more importantly, giving people space to gather their own opinion to strengthen the outcome of what the group comes up with? To converge, this is where you really want to think through it. Like, if I have a list of 20 things, how am I going to work with the group to converge it? So we can do vote is on highest priority. We can talk about, what is most time sensitive. We can talk about who would have the bandwidth to do it. We can talk financial, like what are the things that we can do? We can talk about impact over effort, but think about some way to manage that list and find a way to have people be able to visually see why some ideas are rising to the top and others, which might still be good ideas, just don't meet that priority of the moment. You can also group the ideas that are similar to help manage these long lists. And tools that I like to use, you can just use Google Docs, right? It doesn't have to be fancy. You can just like have people say, vote here. Like, what's your first, what's something that you would prioritize? What's your first vote? What's your second vote? What do you think is going to cost the most and why? Find a way for people to interact with the shared document that you have to converge that list. But do come up with a convergent plan before the meeting, which is why you invest time before a meeting and not have to think about it on the spot, which usually doesn't work well. The other thing you want to think about is how you are going to, oops, I went backwards, is to think about how you're going to make a decision. Who's making the final decision? How is my ideas or input going to be weighed in this? And I want to know in advance of when we need to make a decision, because that's going to be easier for me to see, and having that transparency is so helpful in building trust with the people you're working with, because this might be one set of mini meetings, but there's a very good chance that you're going to be engaging with people for the entire tenure of the time you're working with them. So one thing to do is just being transparent. Like, we're going to strive for consensus, but if we don't get to consensus, we're going to go with the majority, or the final decision is going to come from this person here. Being transparent is key. Tools, again, you can use Zoom. You can like have people do a straw vote or get insights there. I really like the Community at Work Scaling Agreement, and you get to, this is like a Google Doc version, have people break away from the yes or no, like voting yes or no, and have people pop their thought bubbles and think about, like, I either really like this or like, I don't like this at all. It gives space for people to discuss like why they don't like it or why they're like, meh. Because your goal isn't just to like plow through meetings. Your goal is for people to take action, and they need to have buy-in for that. And so you need to spend that extra meeting, spend that extra time to understand how to get more people in that green zone through iterative processes than just trying to force it on someone, because you do need people's buy-in in order for it to be owned by the community and not just by you and your office. Okay, a few more things and then I'll be done here. But next steps, you got to find a way to assign tasks, right? Like, what were the tasks from today? Who's going to take it on? Like, let other people let you know what the tasks are. Let other people assign themselves tasks. I often say, who's really good at, or who knows this person? And they'll be like, I do. And I'll say, great. Would you be the person who connects them and sends this email on? So I don't just like randomly throw it on to somebody. I kind of figure out what the skill set is and ask them what's a reasonable deadline. But definitely don't be the person that takes on all the tasks. Part of developing ownership is dispersing ownership throughout the entire process and practicing, developing that muscle of teamwork. And then feedback. Ask for feedback. You're not going to get better as a facilitator, and you're not going to know what people like or dislike if you don't ask them and give space. So I often say, what is something that's really working right now, what's not? It can be logistics, it can be sort of pacing, all of those things. One way to say it is like, I'm not here to make your life miserable. Please let me know how we can make these meetings better. And people are like, oh, good. I don't want to be like stuck in these meetings either. So let's find a way for it to be more fun and accomplish more things together. And then you got to follow up. You got to send that email out with very clear tasks and in a timely manner. I try to do it like directly after the meeting if I can. Sometimes if I can't, within 24 hours. I do not send my meeting notes. I do not send like the bulk of my meeting notes. I send like the most important thing, which to me is the action items. I'll say, I bold the person's name. I let them know what the action items are. If there's a time-sensitive due date, I let them know. And I give a link to all of the notes I've been taking, especially in this remote framework, right? I'll say everything else is over here. That way they focus on the most important piece. So with that, I am done with the recorded presentation, and I am really excited to do some Q&A with all of you. Thanks. Bye.